my self-esteem was a little low until she introduced me. I was like, God, I'm the shit. I'm like the man. So normally, so I'm doing a talk about risk, trying to do more of a TED Talk thing. I'm like, man, maybe someday I could be like, speaking for like Walmart or something, I could like do these corporate talks, get, paid like 50, 60 grand, for 10 minutes of my time. But, normally I give a talk that's more like this. This is more my normal style of talk, and I'm not like, oh, risk, and what does it mean, and, so deep. It's more like I show some mountains, I talk about how rad I am, I, have some like super childish, inappropriate humor, talk about how smart, handsome I am, and golden showers. And then I show my cute dogs, and, people love it. And but this is actually, I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to talk to you guys about risk, and why probably most of you out there aren't taking enough risk. But for a few of you, it's time to reel it back in, because I want you guys to, maybe you, to live, to see old age. So it's about finding that balance. And I consider myself a little bit of an expert on risk as a professional climber and someone who's had a lot of crazy adventures. I think I know a little bit about it. My relationship with risk started here. Literally, I was conceived in the back of that school bus by my hippie parents. Well, I didn't get into climbing until I was in college. I climbed everything around the property where I was raised. My parents were back-to-land hippies, and my mom, would just like, I'd be climbing up like into trees, getting pitch in my eyes. She'd be rubbing peanut butter in my eyes, trying to get the pitch out and stuff. But she was like, had it. She's like, if you climbed up there, you can climb back down. And she just let me go wild, and I climbed up like 30-foot chain link fences and stuff. And that is basically, in a nutshell, my philosophy on risk is if you get yourself into it, get yourself out of it. And so my parents thank for that. Some kids were getting raised in the classic Judeo-Christian kind of like traditional lifestyle. My mom was making me read Siddhartha at like 7. So you can see how, and I was getting taken out backpacking. And so I was getting kind of like pushed in the direction of maybe a slightly less traditional lifestyle. And I was also, talk about fashion risks, right? I was a little lost, actually going into my teenage years. But when I started going to college up at Humboldt State, I saw these people climbing, and I thought that looked like the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. And I found some people to take me out and introduce me to climbing. And soon after, I met this guy here, Sean Leary. So one of my theories about risk is that it is something that you can train and get better at. So so whether it's like climbing a rock face, or maybe for some of the business people out there, it's like like, oh, I don't know if I should take out the loan. Fuck it, take out the loan. What's the worst thing that can happen? You go bankrupt, You can train yourself to take more risk and be more comfortable in a risky situation. So one of my first risks was I moved into my truck and became a full-on dirtbag climber, and I moved to this place. That guy you saw there, Sean Leary, my climbing mentor, told me about this magical land called Yosemite Valley, where you could go. You could just live in your car. You could climb full time. You could just go to the cafeteria there and eat scraps that other people hadn't finished, and like you could basically live on next to nothing. And to me, this was like this crazy fairy tale land. And so my parents were like, oh, he's gonna, he went to school. He's probably gonna become a teacher. And I'm like, no, I'm gonna move into my truck and go climbing. My parents were like, huh, I guess that's cool. But that was probably the most important risk that I've taken in my life, because it put me in the mecca of rock climbing, arguably in the world, Yosemite Valley, with some of the most incredible walls. I got on search and rescue, and that's when I'd become a good climber. I was like setting some like speed records in El Capitan. I was like getting better at it, and I was like running it out bigger and taking these bigger risks, but they were sort of like bite-sized risks that I could take because of the training that I'd put on it. But when I started doing search and rescue, I saw what happens when you fuck it up, and I saw a lot of dead bodies. I saw a lot of really terrible accidents, and And it affected me in a way where I I wanted to push myself as much as I could as an athlete, and to have the craziest, wildest life that I could. But I also, I want to live, to see another day. And so a lot of, I think, my relationship with risk comes from, people like Sean pushing me, taking me out soloing, and climbing without a rope very early on, but then also seeing what happens if you mess it up. And so it's that kind of risk to reward ratio. And what is risk, right? It's such a nebulous thing, and I think it's really different for everyone. But I think that it's like stepping into an uncertain outcome. It's taking a chance for something that's going to reward you. And for me, that was became God, it would be so amazing to be able to climb El Cap in a day, but I'm going to have to be able to run it out really far in between pieces to climb fast enough. But if I'm solid, that I can do that. And I can say that that I've definitely been rewarded by the risk in my life. And I do feel that we are, as a society, just taking away all of our risk, especially here in the United States. We just want to be so safe. We want to live in our little cocoon in our home. And I believe that, really realize your true potential in life, you're going to have to get out there and do something uncomfortable and push beyond your comfort zone. And I can say, for me personally, it's been really a rewarding thing to do. So I think it actually can be good for you. Can actually be healthy for you. And so I encourage you guys all to do something a little ridiculous, a little stupid. But also it's about building that expertise, right? So it's about this is one man's picnic is another man's funeral, right? So it's about having, building that expertise in whatever, field it might be that you're endeavoring into, to take those risks in a smart and manageable and an intelligent way. And so that's what I think I became a little bit of an expert at in Yosemite Valley. It became that whole, so you see me here, right? And I have no rope. And obviously if I fall, I'm going to die. But this climbing's super easy for me, and the chances of me falling are next to nothing. So so you can look at that and be like, oh my God, that's so ridiculous. But the actual risk is relatively small. And you could even argue that because I can move through this terrain so quickly, because I do not have a rope, that I'm actually exposing myself to the objective risk for less time. So, it's an interesting thing. Early on in my time in Yosemite, I met this guy, Dean Potter, who's someone I think a lot about. He actually is no longer with us, passed away in a base jumping accident. And but he was a big inspiration for me and mentor for me. He was the first real professional climber that I met. And I remember thinking, man, it would be so cool to be like him, to get paid to go climbing. And I think a lot, thanks to his mentorship and him pushing me as a climber, I was getting to this level where I was making a name for myself. I was writing about my exploits, and I was starting to become a pretty well-known climber. And I was like, wow, I think I could follow, in Dean Potter's path, become a professional. And I did manage to pull it off. And I think a lot of the start of that was I was like, how can I go bigger? How can I take this to the mountains? And I went to this place, Baffin Island, and I went on my first climbing expedition. And I learned a couple of lessons. One, choose your partner well. We were both young and super gung-ho and really wanting to prove ourselves. And I think, in retrospect, willing to risk, more. Soon after this was taken, he actually tried to stab me with a fork. He's an actual lunatic. I went to Baffin Island with him, and we decided we were going to climb the Porter route, which at that time had never been repeated. It was it'd taken Charlie 3 weeks to do this, and we decided we're going to do it in a day. It's going to be no problem, right? And if we do it, it's going to be the first grade 7 big wall ever done in a push, and we're going to be gods among men, and you know what I mean? Our egos are just going to be totally gratified, and it's going to be badass. But we really didn't understand how serious this undertaking was, and we we crossed over that line from like a calculated, risk where you really understand the mountain and you understand the route and you understand the level of your risk you were taking. We got ourselves in a situation where we had no idea how heinous it was going to be. We got into some really serious rock fall climbing. Singer got hit by a rock. The storm started to move in. I was like getting off route and couldn't find our way off. And I got to this point where I was like, wow, we might die up here. And to this day, this climb really informs me a lot because this was still to this day probably the closest I've come to biting it in the mountains. And I do think about that now, really understanding the risk and really being smart about the risk I take. Singer made me this painting at the end in commemoration of him jabbing a ice axe into my shoulder because he had such a good time with me out there. But I was undeterred. I came back, God among men. No, I did come back from that trip, and I wrote a story for the American Alpine Journal, and followed it up with some cool first descents in Yosemite. And I was like, I got my first sponsor, the North Face, and I'm going to like my first slideshow. And this guy, Timmy O'Neill, is going to introduce me. And he's all like, please bring CedarWright to the stage. And he shows this photo, which is like, you can imagine all your sponsors are there. This isn't really what you want them to see, You're like a little bummed. You're like, Timmy, you mofo. So the next day I posted this on Facebook of Timmy. And then 5 minutes later, he posted this. So, yeah, this is more CedarWright-like style, risk. I don't know about this whole risk talk. But I got my first sponsor, and I went on my first sponsored expedition to Mali, Africa, and this was a really an interesting time for me. And this is an interesting thing to talk about a little bit. Is that once you're sponsored, and now you're kind of starting to do these things not just for your own personal ego gratification, but for the approval of others, and to that people think you're rad, so that you can have this career. And the risk quotient becomes trickier because, you've got like a photographer who's there and he really wants the shot. And there's just becomes a lot of different motivations that you need to balance. And you need to make really sure that that at the heart of it, that you really want to be there and really want to push yourself in that environment. And I did some even more crazy, risky trips with photographers to Pakistan. And just had some outrageous climbing experiences there, putting up these huge big wall first descents, and the risk quotient here is high, but the reward quotient is high as well. And I look back at these as some of the great experiences of my life. I think that in general in life, there's like a time to take risk, right? So it's like if you just live your life just being like, oh, I'm just going to risk is the answer. And you just like kind of, I know some of these people and they're just kind of sketchball and they're just constantly putting themselves out there. And I feel like, there's a moment when that it's time to like let it hang out a little bit and go for it, And so it's like identifying those moments and not just living life like a total knucklehead all the time, just every once in a while is one of my strategies that I've used to still be here and talking to you today. This is an interesting thing here. So this is the Czech Republic, and this really is something to think about. It's like, as Americans, we're pretty tame, and we're pretty afraid of taking even like really like simple risks. And going to the Czech Republic, and they climb on knots. They don't use like climbing gear. It's like you're running it out huge, and if you fall, you're gonna like you're probably gonna rip that knot out. It's like not gonna hold. The climbing is super bold and super adventurous and super scary. And I came back from that trip. I'm a changed man. I did all this crazy tower jumping, which is like, talk about like just like doing these like 20, 30 foot like leaps across these gaps. Talk about risk, right? It's And actually, I was there with this guy, and he was like supposed to be my guide, and he's all, "Come on!" And he like jumped across this like gap, and like broke his ankle, and he's all like, "You're next." And I was like, "No, bro, I'm like not doing this one." But I did some other cool jumps. I was like, "Yeah, I don't want to break my ankle like you. That seems grim." Man's got to know his limitations. The other big thing about that trip was that was my first trip with this guy. Alex Honnold. I don't know if does anyone know who he is? He's a little-known rock climber, kind of up and coming. I feel like he's going to make a name for himself someday. No, but this for me was like a real turning point in my life was these Sufferfest trips that I did. I called them, this was me starting to become a filmmaker. I was making these films about my adventures. I was sharing them with the world, and this trip where we climbed the 14,000 foot peaks in California by bike, I look back on still one of the great adventures of my life, and it was we did not know if we were going to pull it off till literally to the end. Like every single mountain was a question mark. And, in classic Alex Honnold style, we had one more mountain to go, and I was like, oh, we should probably just play it safe and, just climb the easy route. And he's all, oh, well, there's this new 510 route, and it's unrepeated. We should do the second ascent free solo. And so that's what we did. We did the second ascent of this 510 route free solo. And I'm ripping holds off the wall and stuff. And it made it really climactic. When we finished, I was like, oh my God, thank God that's over. But I look back at it on one of the great experiences of my life, and it's really cool. I just kind of filmed it all, mostly handheld style. Had a friend show up and do some interviews, and I was able to make this film Sufferfest that went out into the world, and I think really inspired some people to have their own Sufferfest, to take their own personal risks in life, and it's something I'm really proud of. We followed it up with this trip to Utah, where we climbed 50 desert towers all by bike about 1,000 miles, and climbed all these crazy desert towers. It was a totally outrageous experience. We climbed the Cobra, actually, to give you an idea of how risky it was. That fell over 3 months after we climbed it. Literally, it got struck by lightning and fell over. It's pretty crazy. So unrepeatable now. Yeah, these are the kind of anchors we were rappelling off for the climbers in the audience. We were simul-rappelled everything, I was like, dude, maybe we should go one at a time. And Alex was like, no, we're in a hurry. Everything had to be as sketchy as possible. And that's the thing. Alex blew his ass out. As a filmmaker, it's moments like these where you're like, oh, sorry, buddy, but I'm so glad that happened to you, because you're it's going to be really good for the movie. He's a good partner in many ways. But actually, I think, as far as talking about risks, I think there's just really no, there's no person that exemplifies the ultimate level of risk and the ultimate risk-taking. I actually went down with Alex to Mexico, and he climbed free solo this route, Sendero Luminoso, and I was actually down there to help him prepare. And we went up, we put tick marks and all the holds, and this is a really serious route. It's 16 pitches, 12D. This is at the absolute cutting edge of big wall free soloing, and I'm here basically. I'm like, fuck, I hope this isn't an assisted suicide, you know what I mean? I'm like, here, let me load the gun, and then you just put it to your head, and then I'll film you blowing your brains out. It'll be awesome, I mean, I joke, but it is it's a serious situation. But Alex is just such a rare and unique person, and so here, I have risk perception is the subjective judgment people make about the severity and probability of a risk. And may vary person to person, and definitely the variance with this guy, it's high. I've known a lot of soloists, a lot of the top climbers in the world, and I've never seen someone quite like him. I actually think that he may have some sort of brain disorder, but it presents itself in a really cool way where he's able to do these really inspiring things. Recently, he free soloed El Cap. And actually, he asked me to come out and be part of it. And for me personally, I was like, you know what, dude, you do you. And I'm psyched to see you when it's over. It was I was like, God, the whole 1% chance of you dying thing makes me uncomfortable with this climb. So I'm really glad he pulled it off. But I do feel, oh yeah, then it's always important. I released this right after he did the solo on my Facebook. This is the climbing community, Alex. I know that you're a god among men, but stay humble. Yeah. It's the free solo edition. It says alone on the bed there. It's risking everything to get you wet. There's yeah. That's what friends are for, So who out there saw Safety Third? A few of you guys did. Cool. So I think you can appreciate the complexity of this relationship between a filmmaker or photographer, and then this person who's taking all this risk in front of you, and it's like it can be collaborative, but it can also there's a lot of responsibility there. There's always, whenever you release one of these soloing films, there's people who say like that's irresponsible. You shouldn't be putting people like this on a pedestal. You should be doing stuff like this for yourself. I'm of the opinion I find this stuff inspiring and motivating, and I like sharing it with the world. But I have with Safety Third had some people push back against me, and they saw the film and they felt really uncomfortable with what they'd seen, and I understand that. And actually, in that process of filming Brad on that cutting edge solo, I did have a come to Jesus moment where I was like, wow, I think he almost fell, it's Brad and Honnold are pretty similar I think they just have a different mindset and a different relationship with risk, where they're able to rationalize this level of risk that for most of us we just couldn't go there, right? We just couldn't put ourselves in that situation without freaking out and then panicking and then torpedoing off the wall in a horrific accident. But he's special, and I just kind of want to just kind of, some of you guys saw this film, but just sort of watch this part of the solo, because this is right going into the crux, and Brad's about 5'5", and so not only is this really hard climbing, but he's kind of short, so it's a little bit reachy and harder for him. And so I'm just sitting there hanging on a rope and I'm filming this, and Brad's like, yeah, I'm ready to go. I'm really psyched. I'm like, oh, cool. I'm going to come out and film it. And I'm thinking, oh, this is just going to be really cool. And then right here, just for a second, he came off the wall. I don't know if you guys can see that. For the climbers, I think you understand, that just for a second, he lost his control. And so for me personally, I'm sitting there on a rope, and I'm like, I had this rush of fear and adrenaline, and I was like, I started all this footage after this is super stabilized, because I actually started to physically shake. I was so scared, and I just tried to keep my mouth shut, and just not do anything. It was took everything I had not to throw him a rope, because I was really worried for his life at this point, and I felt like maybe he was in over his head, and it made me think a lot about documenting this kind of stuff and the responsibility and the I was like, oh, soloing's the most compelling thing that you could show, and I want to make these films, but in retrospect, I think I like the other style. So some of that footage that you saw of Honnold, those photos I took of Honnold on that solo in Mexico, those were all created after the fact. He went and did the solo all by himself, and he had his experience. Who knows, maybe he had a sketchy moment up there too, but it was for him. And in retrospect, I think that probably that's how I'd like to approach soloing from now on. Not to be there in the real moment. It's just too intense, and I think there's the obvious question I asked myself after this experience was, what if Brad had fallen and died while you were filming? And all I can say is my life would have been ruined, and it would have been I'm
just gonna be honest.
I can't imagine a more terrible experience. And
that was
thankfully he sent it, and and I'm really proud of the film, and really glad that that he made it out okay. But who knows, what it was like for Alex up there on El Cap, really, and if he had a moment kind of similar. When you push risk that level, you just never know. So for me personally, I'm kind of going to wrap it up here basically with my own kind of new foray into risk and my new passion, which is paragliding. And it's such a crazy sport. It's definitely dangerous to be flying through the sky. The air is invisible. It's been really fun getting into paragliding. It actually kind of started here, believe it or not, when I did this small rope jump. So you can see right here the rope breaks, and then I just landed in a tree and I'm fine. No, the rope didn't break. Yeah, one more time, right? Just so this is pretty crazy. This was in Crimea, and these guys were like, "Hey, you want to go and do this rope jump?" I was like, "Oh yeah, rope jump, that'll be fun." And then they take me out there, and I was like, "Oh my god!" And actually, this buddy of mine, Corey Richards, tied in, and he sat there for 30 minutes, and then he untied. He's all, nah, I'm good. And then I was like, oh, you pussy. And then I tied in, and I was like, oh, my God, I have to do this. I called him a pussy, and then I jumped off the mountain. And it was actually so amazing. I was like, I want to do it again. I went up and did it again because it was so sick. And, after that, I was like, God, like, how sick would it be to get into base jumping? And I started looking into it, and I my buddy Sean Leary, who you saw earlier, who was my first kind of mentor, then my next climbing mentor, Dean Potter, both got really seriously into the sport, and we're really pushing the outer limits of wingsuit base jumping in Yosemite, doing all these crazy proximity flights all around Yosemite, and pioneering all these crazy jumps. And I was like, God, it's got to be the most. I do believe it's probably the most outrageous and amazing thing that you can do with your body, but unfortunately, those guys have proven that the risk is extremely high. They're both no longer with us, and I actually was like, I think I want to do this, and then I just like looked into it, and I saw the fatalities. I went and did a couple of jumps out of an airplane. I was just like, you know what, this isn't for me. Like the risk is too high. The attraction, obviously, of being able to climb up something and then fly off or jump off were there, but to me, this just seemed like outside of my personal risk quotient. But when I found out about paragliding, I was like, okay, this is like, it's like, in base jumping, you're sitting there with 10 of your friends. You're like, yeah, one of us won't be here next year. Cool, I mean, literally, that's how it is for those proximity flyers, Whereas, you're sitting with like maybe 10,000 of your friends, and one of you is going to be, possibly not with us, next year. So it's not an undangerous sport, paragliding, but it is within my realm of acceptable risk. It's much more of a piloting sport. Everything's happening a lot slower. You're going 25 miles an hour, not 125 miles an hour. And you actually get to fly. You get to circle up in thermals like a bird. It's the most outrageous thing I've ever done in my life. I'm completely cracked out on it. I just like, it's all I want to do right now. My wife, like, who is an avid climber, is like, she's all, so you're going to climb again someday, right? And so I think just to come back to risk, there's like paragliders have had this relationship with risk for so long, and the sport is relatively established, and so they have this thing called risk homeostasis, and I think this is just a really interesting thing. This is the concept, that as the equipment gets better. So, for instance, as you're able to glide further, you're just going to glide further in, so you're still going to be at the exact same amount of risk, right? So it's like as the wing becomes faster, you're just going to fly in more wind, right? And so it's this concept that we as humans, we have this level of risk that we're comfortable with, right? And then if we have technology that makes it safer, we're just going to make it more dangerous by taking more risk within that quotient. And you see that a lot in paragliding, which is like everyone's like, well, why isn't it getting safer? The equipment's getting better. Well, it's because we're always just going to push a little further. And there's just so many classic tropes in this sport, right? And one of the real classic ones is better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air wishing you were on the ground. I definitely proved that to be true by getting blown backwards in super high wind through high tension power lines about a year ago. And, literally went through high tension power lines, hung in the lines, got dropped about 50 feet. The wing reinflated. I landed on the ground and was fine. And but it was a real come Jesus moment for me, and it made me realize, how much I didn't know, and how my gung-ho, like, go-for-it attitude needed to be toned down a little. But at the same time, it's been the most incredible thing. Like, I landed out in these field, and these, like, awesome Mexican girls came and were like, oh, you fell from the sky. And I was like, no, I landed here on purpose, I swear. It's just been so magical. I've had some incredible flights in Boulder, Colorado, where I live, like flying over the Flatirons, which are these rock formations that I got to climb for many years. And it's just been so cool and so outrageous to experience the world from the air, like, and actually get to fly. I've flown with eagles and all these incredible birds, and it's just been definitely one of the gifts of my life. And it's been a risk worth taking. And yeah, and so I would say, for like a few of you out there, reel it in. For most of you out there, I'm just guessing, just on law of averages, reel it out a little bit, take a little more risk. For me, this was, for those of you who saw The Fledglings last night, another one of my films, this was a real peak moment in my life where I climbed Pico de Orizaba, the highest peak in Mexico, then flew off it with my paraglider. And I definitely have I have no regrets. I'm just gonna show you guys the actual flight from that day. You can see the shadow of Pico de Orizaba here at first light. We got up there. It was too windy. It was looking like we weren't going to fly. But I definitely have in my climbing life, one thing I've learned is that you just gotta like kind of just show up and see what happens essentially, and give it a go. And so even though it was like looking too windy and looking too sketchy, we showed up, and miraculously the winds died down, and we were able to fly off of this mountain. And actually, little known fact, Annika Hernan, who's sitting over here, who is running if you guys haven't checked out Recaps out here, it's an awesome local hat brand. I'm wearing one of her hats. But Annika, she was behind the scenes, but she also flew off the mountain, becoming the only woman to fly off of Pico de Orizaba. So we have a badass here in our midst. And yeah, you guys should definitely go over and check out her hats. And if everyone buys one, then it might pay for her booth. So, so hook a sister up. But yeah, this was the moment that we flew off Pico de Orizaba, and it certainly wasn't safe, but it was certainly worth it. And I do believe that a safe, boring life is to me a little more horrifying than this life that I've lived. And I mean, it's kind of cliche, but it really is true that when you're on your deathbed, it's going to be those things you didn't do that you're going to regret, and all of your material possessions are going to be meaningless. But these experiences that you had are priceless and so important. And so we all need to go out there and collect those experiences. And I think peak experiences are inherently going to have some risks to them, and I think that's a good thing. And so I guess with that, I just want to say thanks, guys, for listening to my talk. And just remember, that if you put your balls to the wall, you might pull, or your ovaries to the wall, you might pull something off rad. And with that, I leave you with my two cute dogs and this message that, you got to get on the floor if you want to have a dance. So get out there, get after it. I'm stoked to talk with anybody or anyone that has questions after this, and to answer a few questions right now. And thanks a lot, guys, for coming out for my talk. I think I went over the 15 minutes a little bit, but it's a work in progress. Yeah. Thanks, guys.